the Mortality Mindset Podcast with Patrick Mathieu, designed to help you live a life of radical resilience at home, at work, everywhere.
This episode of the Mortality Mindset Podcast is brought to you by me. If you're not already a subscriber to my free weekly email, what is wrong with you? Seriously, go sign up for the Mortal Living newsletter at mortalliving.substack.com or at the bottom of the mortalitymindset.com website. I'll also put a link in the show notes. In the past 3 episodes, I've been talking about the big questions that people often end up asking themselves. And as I mentioned, these are deep, fundamental questions that we can end up asking ourselves over and over again if we don't take the time to properly reflect on them. The first question is, who am I? Where we take a hard look at our identity. The second question is, why am I here? Where we consider our roles, our contribution, and our legacy. In this episode, I want to focus on a third question. It revolves around the notion of agency, and the question is, whose life am I living? Now, if that question puzzles you because you're thinking, come on, Patrick, what do you mean? Of course I'm living my own life. Well, please stick around and hear me out. Taking a moment to think carefully about whose life you're living can save you a lot of grief down the road. As a coach, I've worked with a lot of people who eventually come to realize that they've been living someone else's life. They usually fall into one of 2 categories. The first group starts to ask themselves this question when they're struggling with time management issues. So take a moment right now and think about your daily schedule. Think about all the things you need to do during a day. Now ask yourself, who decides what goes on my schedule? Who decides how I spend my day? The usual answers are my boss or my work. If you're an entrepreneur, it's my clients or my customers, or my significant other, my kids, my friends. Well, at least back in the days when we could freely socialize and have friends outside of Zoom. One of the issues I often end up helping clients work through is their time management and scheduling. No one ever has enough time to do all the things they want to do. So when we start looking at the tasks and events that fill up their days, people will sometimes come to a realization that their time really isn't their own. Now, sometimes the solution involves reframing that realization in order to acknowledge certain realities, and sometimes the solution involves making concrete changes. But my goal with this is to help clients avoid any building feelings of resentment and resignation. The second group of people who come to realize that they've been living someone else's life do so because they discover they've been putting a higher value on the opinions of others than on their own opinion. I've worked with people who come to realize that their goals and their priorities have all been about seeking the approval of others. Parents, teachers, siblings, partners or spouses, or bigger things like cultural expectations, lining up with the cultural expectations that you might have, or just the broader societal expectations. But you're doing all of these things. You're trying to align your goals and your priorities in order to get the approval of something from the outside. And I've worked with people whose goals and priorities have been about rebelling against these same other external forces. I'll tell you, it's not a fun day when you realize you've been living a spite-driven life. And finally, I've worked with people who are trying to emulate the lives of others. Whether the motivation is success, fame, status, these people are actively, yet sometimes still subconsciously, trying to live the life of someone else, trying to emulate their lives. I encourage everyone to spend some time seriously considering the question, whose life am I living? Because there are some very real dangers lurking in the shadows. If you're living your life to gain the approval of someone else, ask yourself, what happens if you never measure up? And what happens when that person is gone? Then who will give you the approval you crave? The same is true of people who are rebelling against external expectations. One day they'll have to ask themselves, who am I when there's nothing to rebel against? I want to leave you with a final thought. The absolute reality is that we only get one life. We're mortal. We're not owed a specific amount of time, and the end often comes without warning. Why spend any of our precious time living someone else's life? Live like it matters.